Well, there we go. It was going to be a solo one again here, Alicia, but then I decided to pull you in. Good to see you. All right, so we are back once again for another Canada Immigration Live Q&A, one of the longest running live Q&As for immigration on YouTube. I think first ones that I did were probably back in maybe 2016, 2017. It's all a blur now, but we've been doing this for a long time, and it is something that we look forward to every week. I'm here with my co-host, Alicia Backman-Bahari. How are you doing today, Alicia?
I'm doing well, Mark. I'm doing well, and it's a waiting game right now, I guess, for most people with Express Entry because there literally have been no draws since the end of April. April 24th was our last one, so I'm getting a few people who are now trying to figure out what to do and submitting their profiles from that draw from the Francophone. But everybody keeps asking, when's the next draw going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because more and more every day we are getting people who are just wondering what they're going to do. And it's hard because we'll pull in Minister Miller here early. Why don't we pull in Mr. Fraser too? We'll pull both of them in here. So if we look back historically, Minister Fraser here, the previous minister, was all about international students and people who were here that had gained experience, that were the ones that they were focusing on, that they were their best candidates for immigration. And that's what was said 2021, 2022. And the reality is it's still true. And people need to understand that international students still who come study and then work in occupations that are related to their education or that fill labor shortages are still important to the country. They are. But the problem is there are only so many spots. So as Minister Fraser disappeared, then Minister Miller here has had to bear the brunt of some really difficult decisions because of the numbers of temporary residents that are here in Canada. And Alicia, just yesterday, and it's very easy to vilify Minister Miller here. And in fairness, no one's perfect, and he's no different than anyone else, but he's basically the sacrificial lamb right now because he's the one that's having to make and reiterate to people that temporary really does mean temporary and that there isn't a guarantee to permanent residence. And Igor and I were in a consult yesterday with just this fellow. I had a consult with him back in January, and my heart just goes out to him. He's caught in this world where he's submitted an ONP application, but his work permit is expired. He's submitted an extension of his work permit under whatever category, one of those, and it's going to get refused. And now he's wondering, what do I do? And he is not alone. And we talked, people book 25-minute consults, and that's fine, but it was the last one of the day. We talked for over an hour. And just talking about the realities of things and how people are just really, disappointment is not the term. They're devastated. And it's only going to get worse because Minister Miller has clearly stated that they are not going to do any expansive programs like they've done in the past. They're not going to open up some new TR to PR pathway that will allow all these people to transition. You have to listen to what he's saying. And what he's saying is there are too many temporary residents. We need to reduce them. There will not be room enough for everyone to become a permanent resident, and you need to prepare to go home if you do not have a pathway forward. And this was the discussion that I had with this individual, and it was so hard. And one of the pieces of advice that I'm now finding I'm giving people more often than not is, look, you can drag this out for 5 or 6 more months. You can deplete all of the savings that you've accumulated to settle in Canada. Or you can take that, recognize that the options are just not available now, and choose to go home and use that money to help get resettled in your country, and then hopefully look for another opportunity later than staying in Canada on visitor extensions, depleting your funds, and then running the risk of feeling compelled that you have to work under the table. So So this is the world, Alicia, that we're in, and we'll, those of you who are just tuning in, please post where you're listening from. We want to hear where you're coming in from. OC didn't think we were going to go live. Sometimes we're a little bit late as we're scrambling to go from one thing to another to do these lives. Alicia and I do have daily practices. But just like Marlena and these other individuals, just post. We love to hear where you're tuning in from. I love to get people shout outs. Spider-Man's, he's in Montreal and now again, learning French, whatever he's up to. But yeah, this is, you're very welcome for the lives VK. So please post in the comments because I love to see those. Yeah, it's fun to see how far this live stream reaches. So we encourage you guys to do that. But back to the discussion at hand, Alicia. So I'm assuming you are experiencing the same thing with the people that are reaching out to you.
Yeah, and it was interesting, Mark. We had a good friend over from Brampton, so he lives in Brampton and in
Oh,
Toronto area, and he's heavily involved in the volunteer community and in the food bank and the hospital system. And he says it's heartbreaking right now, the number of students, and they'd never experienced this before, that are having to access the food bank services. And the number of students who don't have a place to go anymore. And all these stories that we hear about students crammed into a tiny little room with 8 other students, being taken advantage of, people trying to sell them LMIAs. And one of the things that I really don't think enough students and enough organizations that help students understand is that there is a vulnerable work permit option. And maybe you can even just share the IRCC webpage on how vulnerable work permits work and the application process. But most of the time, if you are being abused by your employer, if people are taking your passport, or if you are being forced to work under the table, make sure that you are reporting what is going on so that you can do a police report and you can get some evidence that is then going to form the basis of your vulnerable work permit application. And this is something that I don't think enough people know, because they feel like they are completely trapped into this, employer-specific work permit for a work authorization for an employer that's abusing them. And they think that if they report it, they are going to have to go home to their home country and they'll lose everything. But there is a process to report abuse, to report employers who are violating your rights, who are not paying you, who are keeping your passports or your work permit documentation, who are forcing you to work under conditions that are different than what's stated on the LMIA, or are paying, like requiring you to pay for the LMIA and then deducting that from wages. All of that is highly illegal. You must report, and then you can apply for this open work permit for vulnerable foreign workers. So this is not an employer closed work permit. You can now work for anybody. And I really want to get the message out there for people who are, especially students who are being abused, that there is an alternative, but it does require some proof. And so it requires being courageous and coming forward and then using all that proof in your application.
and that's a really good point too, Alicia, because I applied for one of these for another client and they were not proactive in reporting it. So basically they extricated, they left the employment, tried to find some other alternatives and just ended up being stuck. But they didn't report it. They didn't report it to the police. They didn't report the exploitation to employment standards. And because they didn't have that evidence, the work permit got rejected. And so they ended up having to go home. And through that whole time, they were working at considerably lower wages than they were supposed to be paid, working long hours, even having to work in another operation or another entity of that business owner that was all completely outside the confines of their LMIA based work permit. So when you've got these types of situations, it becomes really, really challenging because unless people report, then this is never going to change. And it's doubly hard, Alicia, because I know what these people are going through. And when you think of giving everything to be able to come here at your one shot of immigrating to Canada, and then now you can see, even though you've done everything right, that the pathways are drying up. There's this level of desperation that comes in that compels people to pursue every possible avenue they can. And unfortunately, in many cases, even to consider doing things that are not lawful, whether it is paying someone for a job offer, or whether it is working under the table for cash. And the feeling is that, boy, if I don't just try to stretch this out as long as I can, well, then I have nothing. Well, I think Alicia and I, she'll confirm with me that it is far better for you to comply and go home and not tarnish your immigration history than to overstay, work illegally, end up going home, and then get a magical, wonderful job offer, a genuine, LMIA based job offer to come back, only to have that work permit refused at the, overseas visa office because there was non-compliance with your original temporary entry. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Alicia, but it's, yeah, I just, my heart goes out to all these people that are now in a situation that they just feel there's no hope, there's no options.
Yeah, and exactly what you said, Mark. If somebody has engaged in unauthorized work, illegal work, and you go back and then you try to come back in and get a new work permit, even if magically you find an employer, a Canadian employer who has a real LMIA and you've got a genuine job offer, if the officer sees that your previous employment in Canada had been unlawful or unauthorized and they have evidence to that effect, an officer is actually prohibited from issuing a new work permit for 6 months past the date of the last violation of that unauthorized work. And I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but it's important to know that. So it is always better to make sure that you are following the law, so that you are not in a situation where you're caught with the inability to get a work permit, let alone misrep, right? They might go after you for a 5-year misrep bar as well.
All right, well, let's dive right in here. This question is from Laura, and I'm not sure. Good morning, ATP program. Which one is that?
It might be the Alberta Tech, maybe.
Pathway? Which official document approved by the government can display the employer's NAICS code? Where can I find a document that contains the employer's NAICS code?
Mhm. So, Laura, that's a good question. And under Alberta Tech Pathway, not only do you have to be in one of the listed NOC codes, your occupation has to be, but also your employer has to be in an industry that is on the NAICS code list. And so it is tricky, and we had a question about this, I think, a couple weeks ago as well. But the employer has to self-identify. And so they have to say, yes, this is the industry that we work in. You need a letter of support from the employer. And if that employer has a number of different business units or business groups, they're going to have to specify which one they think is the most accurate depiction of what they're doing within the office that you're working at. So, this is something that you really need to have a letter of support from your employer about.
All right, let's slide over here and we're going to go to another one. And this one is from, if I can pull it up here, this is from Norton. And Norton says here, should I apply family visit visa now or wait for the SIMP nomination and then mention it in the application? Issue is dual intent. Will visa be easy with or without the SIMP? Am on a postgrad SIMP next month. How do you advise people with this whole concept of dual intent where you've got a PR application in the queue? I'm assuming, Alicia, that the family is included in that SIMP application, that they're dependents, but maybe we'll operate on that assumption.
hmm And so, Norton, whenever you ask should, right? Should I apply? Should my family apply for their visitor visas? This is always a consult. Both Mark and I are immigration lawyers. We've been practicing immigration law for over 20 years. It is important for us to be professional in terms of making sure we're not giving you incorrect advice. And so, a few lines on this forum where you're asking a question is not enough for us to understand what is happening with your family, what's going on with your applications, and what are the risks and potential benefits involved in doing different things. And so we can't give you advice. We can only give general information in this live stream and hopefully information that will be relevant to a number of people who are watching and listening. And so one of the things that applicants always have to show I'm assuming that your family may or may not be with you in this circumstance and they're coming from overseas to join you. It is always important to provide proof of temporary intent. And so if you are currently here on a study permit and you're transitioning to a work permit, if you have an intention to also pursue permanent residence, yes, you can have a dual intent, just like you said, but you can't lose your temporary intent. And when you want to bring other family members over from overseas, now one of the things that the officers look at is what are the ties to your home country and what are the ties to Canada? And if you have more and more and more people coming from your home country and less ties there, then that's a factor. They call it push-pull factors. They're going to look at, well, what do you still have connecting to you to your home country at all, right? Do you still have property there? Do you still have family there, like extended family or parents? Do you still have a business there? Do you still have something substantial that's tying you to your home country? Because if you don't, then there's a higher risk that your family members' applications are not going to get approved because they don't have as much ties there if you're in Canada and they all want to come join you. And so there's a number of factors to consider when you're looking at this, and the timing of things is also important. And keep in mind that when you are doing a number of applications for PNPs, you have to maintain that status and you've got to show what other sorts of applications people are submitting. So make sure that you are being honest and forthright about what kind of temporary applications you and your family members are also submitting.
We'll answer one more question, then we'll give some shout outs here, Alicia. So VK says, what are your thoughts on the French draws in general? I've read some articles from Quebec newspaper that the federal needs to even increase it to 20 to 30%. So we can confirm that.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, Mark, this is actually a good time to slide over. So IRCC sent a news release yesterday about the community applications are now open for rural and francophone immigration pilots. Yeah, so this is the one here. And this is where increasingly, and this is, Mark, you and I had a whole podcast issue about the direction of immigration, where immigration is going
Yeah.
for 2024. And we emphasized, based on what the minister was projecting a few months ago, about rural communities and francophone. And so this is something that now is coming to fruition. They are now saying, here are the pilot programs. We're going to start rolling them out. Take a look at our Future of Immigration video
Yeah, actually, it
because
looks like we've got about 27,000 people that have watched it. So it's probably something worth watching. So if you haven't, go check it out. It's right here on the YouTube channel, The Future of Immigration in Canada 2024.
And this fits right in with the trends that we are seeing with francophone, prioritization of francophone, and also prioritization of not only provinces, but communities being able to identify what economic and community needs they have for immigrants. And so if you keep scrolling down, so it talks about the fact that, the interested economic development organizations within certain communities can apply. It's a quick deadline. They need to apply by July 2nd. But if you go down, it actually has the policy on francophone immigration in the quick facts down there. And so that might be interesting reading for people just to take a look at why we have all these francophone draws. And it's because there's actual bilateral agreements between the federal government and Quebec, the province of Quebec, about francophone proportions of our population, and it's important for cultural heritage as well as other reasons. And so there's a whole detailed analysis and policy background on why they are doing this. And you're right, when the comment was it's increasing to 20 to 30% for express entry, they have told us that yes, the targets for express entry overall for 2024, they want to have about 30% francophone. And that's not only the targeted francophone draws, but it's also through general draws because people who have that NCLC level 7 are now able to get a big boost in their score.
All right, let's do a few shout outs here. I see we've got Candy who's tuning in. She says, thank you for hosting this. Candy from Trinidad. Wonderful. Um, Israni says, hello, Mark and Alicia. You people are doing great work for new aspirants who wish to come to Canada. Oh, and I better post Spider-Man's comment here. Do I need to disclose Spider-Man as a name that I've used in the profiles and applications? Well, Spider-Man, I'll let you make that determination, but I guess maybe take a screenshot of you using your name in our YouTube in the live stream here, and then you can use that as evidence when you need to upload it for the use of another name. Maybe do that. That might be a good strategy. Very good. Okay, let's get. There's a few others that came in. So we have Indrajit, who's connecting in from India. Hello. Seshand is in Toronto. Eric is Cameroon. We've got Suliha is in Hamilton. And then we've got Shwet is in India. Rupinder's in Winnipeg. This is great. Oh, Louvet is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, I think, DRC. Sleepless BKKK is watching from Thailand. And I think you probably are sleepless because what time is it there right now? Well, maybe it's in the afternoon. Maybe it's 10:30. Let's see, who else do we have here? Indrajit says it's good to see you both in listening. Very, very welcome. Let's see. Yeah, and Eric says, "Oh, this is heartbreaking. Leaving Canada after your temporary work permit. Too bad." It is true. It is absolutely true. Let's see. We've got Exo Tracy is from Manila. Thanks for giving us that shout out. And let's see what else. If there's anyone else here, we've got lots of questions. Oh, we've got Andy. Hey, Andy, a past subscriber to the Express Entry step-by-step course and the new created 2024 Accelerator program. Good to see you. And let's see here. Who else do we have? It's Ronnie. Thank you so much. He says, hope your back pain is improved and happy to see you smiling again. Well, there is marginal improvement. I am not yet on the pickleball court, which makes me quite sad, but I do have some new tools I'm using, which is a yoga block I found is fantastic for putting right behind your back when you are suffering from a little back pain. It's kind of funny in my consults yesterday, at least for the last couple of days, I've been bouncing back and forth between this computer and my laptop, and sometimes when I'm doing my Express Entry reviews with people, it just works better to do it on this computer because the screen is bigger and everything. And so sometimes I'll shut my camera off and then I'll stand up and walk around a little bit while we're working through it. So, oh yeah, the things you do, and that's what happens. And Alicia was warning me. She says, if you don't listen to your body early when it talks to you, it will then yell at you, essentially. And that's what's happened to me after sitting for hours and hours at this desk, for about 20 years. So it finally catches up to you. Yes, indeed. So I'm now doing a better job of trying to listen to Alicia. All right. Okay, I think we've got, I've tried to give all the shout outs, and then we've got a ton of questions. We've got Jenny, who's over in Toronto. We've got a hello here. Looks like maybe they're a YouTuber. It looks like that's a little mic. And what else do we have here? What else do we have? I think we're pretty. We've got Batman is also. We got Spider-Man and Batman down in Dallas, Texas. Let's see here. And I don't know. Is this Devanto says PR was approved? We are so happy everything worked out in the end. Hey, that's fantastic. I'm not sure if Devanto had. Let's see here if there's any other comments. Oh, okay. Okay, here we go. So Devanto says, hey, Mark and Alicia, I want to say a big thanks for the work you're doing here. I have been a follower of the channel, although I did not get a chance to work with you on a PFL I got for my PR due to issues beyond your control. Okay. I want to report that my husband's work permit was approved in the end of April and our PR was applied early May. This is divine. Okay. And the PR was approved. We're so happy everything worked out in the end. Well, I will definitely give some applause for that. So congratulations. That's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. Okay. Oh, and then we've got Canoes who's tuning in from Libya. And oh, look at this. We've got Crystal. She is from Lethbridge. She's right here in the hometown. I'll give you one of those. So awesome. Some people say, where are these guys actually located? Who are they? Well, just so you know, I am in Lethbridge, recording out of my home office here, and Alicia's up in Calgary, and Igor's up in Calgary, and Prem's up in Calgary, and pretty much everybody's up in Calgary, and just me down here in Lethbridge. So, all right, let's jump back, and we'll get to a few more questions. But one of the things, Alicia, I just want to pivot just for a second and just talk about one of the elephants in the room, which you hinted on a little bit, and that was the rounds of invitations. And so not only are people wondering, what is the future going to hold? Is there even going to be a pathway for me? We then see the government basically stop issuing rounds for an extended period. Now, it's not like in the last one was almost 1 full month ago. And it's not like we've never seen that. Okay. And of course, it was a French language draw. but there is precedent for them to be, delay the issuance of a round of invitations. And we could very well see one today. But what are your thoughts on that as we look at these previous rounds? What are your thoughts on like sometimes people confuse invitations issued with the annual levels plans and the number of immigrants that are actually coming in? But what are your thoughts on that? We had a general draw. You can see here, little over 2,000 invitations, 529. Before that, we had the big STEM draw, and we've got a number of clients that were drawn through STEM that I'm doing express entry. I'm helping them with their express entry applications, their EAPR, and their documents right now, and it dropped down to 491. But what are your thoughts on and your take on this?
Yeah, and so, brace yourselves because when that next general draw comes, it's going to be super, super high because now we haven't had a draw on a general since the 23rd. So it's now basically been a month. And so those CRS scores are not going to be coming down from the 529 levels. They might be probably higher than the 529 levels if a whole bunch of people have piled in.
Yeah.
And so, temper your expectations because when there's the timing of these draws matters hugely. And so when you have multiple smaller draws back to back, and especially in a targeted occupation category, so one of the trades or one of, if they've done back to back stems, that really drives the CRS down. And when they did back to back Francophone draws, that's when you're seeing CRS scores of like 336 and things like that. But when there's been a long delay before the next round of invitations, then those scores are going to just shoot up again.
Yes. And I just want to give you a similar comparable. So you can see back here, there was a lengthy delay between draw 271 and 272. And they did a large draw. But even because of that duration of time that passed, it climbed all the way up to 561. Now, I don't anticipate that the scores are going to be 561. But if we go up here and look for other comparables, you can see here we went from December 21st to January the 10th. And then they did a smaller draw, which pushed it to 546. And then once again here, if we look for another, fairly large gap, I guess you could say, right here. So we went from, let's see, what's the best little gap? Well, probably you can see basically what we're talking about here. So when the draws are smaller and there's been a little bit of time, so this was, there's 2 weeks between these two general draws, but we had that massive French one. I can imagine because of this French one here, that this score here on February the 13th would have been even higher if there weren't for the fact that so many were drawn through this draw here. So if I was to predict, Alicia, I would say that it's probably going to be in this range here of about 540. At least that's my thought. If they were to do a general draw, it's going to be 540, almost 550. It would not surprise me, depending upon the number of invitations that are issued. And then, of course, the draws, what are we waiting for? Well, we've had ag, healthcare, transport. You can see STEM. They're systematically going through them. I think ultimately healthcare was back in February. So, and the transport trade, we're probably due for maybe another transport trade. It just, yeah, it's there isn't a specific rhyme or reason to it, and I wish maybe they'd be a little bit more transparent with how they're doing it, but this is a reality. So we'll have to see if there's a draw today, and if you guys see a draw, let us know and we'll pull it up right during the live. All right, let's see what we have here from Hardeep. So Hardeep says, hello Mark and Alicia, RFV male for PR on April the 4th, but came to Canada on the 27th of April. Raised a web form on 2nd of May that I'm in Canada. After that, no response from IRCC. So request for visa, I think, maybe, is that RFV? Mail for PR on April the 4th, but came to Canada on April 27th. So I'm suspecting when you came to Canada, maybe they had a separate visa. Maybe they didn't require one. This is one, my friend, where we're going to have to ring this bell unless you can figure out exactly what Hardeep is asking.
Yeah, it almost seems like it was an outside Canada application that
And then they
somehow
came to
they came
Canada.
to Canada on a visa that wasn't a landing
PR.
visa.
Yeah.
And now they're in Canada, but now IRCC is probably confused because they're thinking that they need to do the outside Canada COPA process, but now you're trying to switch to an inside Canada e-COPA process. Um, so it does seem a little bit out of the usual, because normally you would be telling them before you came to Canada, try to get that process changed if you did have a valid visa to come into Canada. But something seems to have fallen through the
Yeah.
cracks. So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, what we do, ring the bell and recommend that you click on the link below and book a consult. Okay, Isabel says, how do we declare a visa overstay in the EAPR? The EAPR doesn't ask for this in the statutory questions. This is a great one. This is a really good question. I'll give an applause for that. What are your thoughts on that one, Alicia?
Yeah, so it definitely is a question in the statutory declarations. Were you ever refused a visa, or did you ever, violate the conditions overstay on a visa in Canada or any other country? But if you know that you do have a visa overstay, um, and that is something that you need to discuss specifically, put it in your client letter of explanation. And you'll have to be careful about how you do this, and you'll have to be honest, because otherwise you run the risk of misrepresentation. And also, if it was unauthorized work, like let's say you had a visa overstay in another country, but you're relying on that work for experience points in your express entry application for foreign experience, you know, it is important that you are not relying on unauthorized work to claim points. And so there are other pieces of the puzzle that you need to consider as soon as you've got potential unauthorized work or a visa overstay. So it's something that you should consider carefully. And I would recommend booking a consult so you can discuss what happened, when, and why, and how it affects you.
Yeah. And Isabel, this is something that we see. It's not uncommon, right? It's not uncommon to have overstayed in another country, not in Canada. So we'll treat this. How do we declare a visa overstay in the EAPR? Okay, we don't know if you're talking about Canada or overseas, but the reality is with the EAPR questions, the statutory information questions, you're right. It doesn't specifically ask questions about overstays. It's all about refused visas and things like that. So we will never ever advise someone to fail to disclose something that they should, that could affect the processing of their applications. That's the very core of misrepresentation by omission. But neither I nor Alicia can give you any information or direction on this issue. Definitely over this live stream. We would really encourage you to book a consult so that we can understand exactly what the circumstances are, because you do want to be careful. And is there a specific like rule that says you can't claim work experience gained overseas if you were out of status in that country? Well, there's no specific provision that says that, but it goes to the heart of credibility. It goes to the heart of how you can prove it. And in many countries, when you are not working, and paying taxes properly, and you don't have the authority, well, you just don't have the documentation to prove it. And not too many employers are going to say, hey, yep, this person worked for me. They were illegal, and I paid them cash. Like, very rarely you're going to be able to get the evidence to support it. So those practical barriers tend to be as much of an issue as the legal ones. But understand, when you're going through this process, no matter what the question is, how do we, I like how you phrased it, how do we, is definitely a general question, but in your situation, we definitely can't advise you. I've had people say, well, look, I answered all the questions that they asked. I didn't ask that. And that may be the way to go. There may not be a question that asks something that you're concerned about, but there may be other reasons why you want to be forthright and declare it as well. I'll give you an example while we're on this topic. And the example with being, overstaying and working illegally is our dear colleague, Igor. And so when he was in the US, him and his wife got some horrible advice and representation from an attorney. I don't know if they're in California, where they were. And they had a real genuine opportunity at potentially going through an exceptional visa, an O visa in the US. But it was botched. And so they ended up falling out of status, their funds depleting. And what happens? It's like many of you guys, you then feel compelled you have to work. Well, for Igor, he had his master's in law. He had really good English. And at the time, he was eligible to get an ITA. But we had this elephant in the room, which was the unauthorized work. So in the application, we answered everything truthfully. For him, the work experience he was claiming was not the unauthorized work in the US because, well, for one, it was tier 4 work. It was lower skill construction work, so we couldn't claim it anyways. But in his case, we were very honest and forthright, and it was a battle because IRCC, although I don't have direct evidence, I do believe they notified the U.S. authorities about his status because we disclosed it on the Canadian application. And he was called into, immigration enforcement court in the U.S. And him and his wife had to go through this. And Igor and I have talked about this on the channel, so it's not like it's confidential. But we went through a battle. But we knew that immigration, as long as we were honest and forthright, that there was no specific law, that would bar him based on, current case law, based on Immigration Act and regs and the policies. And so we laid it all out. We're honest, and Igor is a Canadian citizen now. So these things, you'll get some people that will say, don't tell unless it's asked. But there may be some times and circumstances where it makes sense to be a little bit more forthright and to, how I explained to a client just yesterday when they had an issue, do we disclose or not? My view almost always is to disclose. And the reason I like to do that is because then I have the ability to frame the issue. So I have the ability to tell the officer, look, this could be a concern, but this is why it's not. And this person is honest and we're forthright and we're coming with clean hands versus someone who says, don't say anything and hope they don't find out. And then an officer discovers it. Well, how much do you think they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt if they had to dig and find something that you didn't disclose that they felt was material in the adjudication of your application? So keep all of that in mind. And this is just how we roll, at Holthe Immigration Law. But it's we believe that in many instances it makes sense to disclose. All right, let's jump into Tracy XO here. She's got a bunch of questions, and I'm going to pull them up, Alicia. They're in sequence here. Normally, I don't do a multiple one, but I am going to still ring the bell, Tracy, and recommend that you slide over, book a consult with us right here, and then we can actually dive into this deeper. But we'll take a few seconds just to talk about this because this is something I see a lot in the context of family sponsorship. So Tracy says, my partner, same sex, is in Canada as a TR or as a temporary worker and is planning to sponsor me as a common law partner. We've been in a relationship for 11 years. And unfortunately, in our country, it has not yet been legalized. So they don't recognize common law. She did not declare me as a common law in her application as we did not know our relationship is recognized in Canada and went with our country's laws. Can she change her status from single to common law status in IRCC? So once again, this is a very specific question that really is this. But Alicia, maybe we can talk just a little bit about this whole concept of married spouse, common law spouse, conjugal spouse.
So in order to file a spousal sponsorship application, people have to make sure that they are fitting one of the legal categories. If you are doing an inside Canada application, the only options are legally married or common law spouses. Common law spouses means that you've been living together 12 months, continuous cohabitation without a break as conjugal partners. So it means you're having intimate relations. If you were doing an outside Canada application, you could do common law, you could do legal in marriage, or it's possible to do what's called a conjugal sponsorship. This is rather complex and it's not used unless really you can't legally get married in your country and there's war, and it's very rare that people would file a conjugal application. This often comes up, right, where people don't realize that in Canada, 12 months continuous cohabitation, you're viewed to be common law spouses according to Canadian law. And the law presumes you to know the law in Canada. And so the risk here is misrepresentation, right? That your initial application did not disclose the common law status. And so now, if your spouse turns around and says, well, wait a minute, I'm actually going to sponsor that person, even though I came in as a single person on my visitor visa or my work permit application, immigration's going to have a whole bunch of questions. And so right away, it's important to make sure that you are doing this properly and explaining why you both did what you did. Um, so is it possible to have your spouse turn around and sponsor you? Yes, it is possible, but you have to tread carefully because immigration could say it's misrepresentation and that your spouse wouldn't have received a work permit in the first place had immigration known that they were in a spousal relationship. So, really, they want to understand what happened, why it happened, and it's important for both of you to understand what the risks are and how to address those risks.
All right. Okay, let's slide over here to 5411 TV. He says, hi, Mark and Alicia. I'm Mike from Kenya. I just graduated in STEM and have 3 years of foreign work experience. Can I apply for FSW, or do I have to have Canadian experience first? So this is kind of an express entry 101 here.
Mhm. So it is completely possible for you to apply for a valid profile if you meet the minimum eligibility criteria for federal skilled worker. So for federal skilled worker, keep in mind you've got to meet those minimum pass points. And maybe, Mark, we can mention Igor's done an amazing job redesigning our website. So
Yeah.
you might have noticed when Mark flipped over, our website looks a little bit different. I think it looks fantastic. Let us know what you think of it. But one of the fantastic tools that we have now on our website is if you go over to the Express Entry section, the tab on our navigation bar at the top, you go down to Express Entry and you can calculate your CRS score. And so this tool now has both aspects of it. It has that federal skilled worker minimum pass mark to see if you're passing those 67 FSW minimum eligibility criteria, and then it'll calculate your comprehensive ranking score, that CRS score. And so as you go through, it's going to give you a running total to make sure that you're eligible for both. So I would recommend go take a look at this tool, check your federal skilled worker minimum pass mark of 67 points. Once you've reached that, you can submit a profile, um, keeping in mind that those CRS points are going to have to be super, super high to have a realistic chance at getting an invitation to apply. But crazy things happen. And sometimes, if you happen to have the right knock experience and you can qualify for a targeted draw, maybe you do have a better chance with a lower CRS.
All right, Alexa, let's see here. She says, my friend's family got their PR through Manitoba PNP. However, the spouse is working hybrid for an Alberta employer. So sometimes he's in Alberta. Will this affect their PR or citizenship? So once again, we'd really much rather have an opportunity to specifically talk to them because it's hard to make that call. But generally, Alicia, let's maybe address the parameters around PNPs and the foundation of them, and the fact that they do expect that you are going to economically establish yourself in that province, not in Alberta. And so maybe you can just chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the important things on a provincial nomination is that the province is using up one of their precious spots to give to your friend's family to say, we really want to support this family because we believe that they will stay in our province and become contributors economically and culturally to our province. And that's the obligation that people have when they say, yes, I intend to live in this province. Here's all my proof of my intention to live in this province. And it might be that your friend can say, well, look, we have a rental, or maybe we bought a place in Manitoba. We have our kids going to school in Manitoba. Maybe the other spouse is working in Manitoba. We've got bank accounts here. We've established, we're volunteering in the community. We're really part of the community. And one of the spouses is working part-time in Alberta, but they're also working in Manitoba. And you could maybe establish a case for how you are continuing to meet your intention to be part of Manitoba. But it is something that you want to be careful on because you have to be honest when you're doing your PR card renewal application, and you have to disclose where you are living and where you are working. And so this is something where you just want to be careful. Your friend should be careful about being honest and making sure to not misrepresent, and also to show that they are meeting their intention to continue to economically establish in the province that gave them the nomination.
All right. Okay, let's get to our next question. This one's from Dawad. He says, "Hi, Mark. I will be graduating in Trent University this June. I have 4 months job offer from the Ministry of Transport, Ontario. Can I add it to my Express Entry profile application?" So, in this case, this is the tricky part. So, you're going to be graduating in June, and you've got a 4 month job offer from the ministry. So, if you're looking to claim points for Express Entry, any work that's done while you're a full time student isn't eligible for the CEC. And that's in Canada. I'll get to another question that someone asked about internships and things outside of Canada. But for this purpose, while you're in full-time studies, you can't count it. Typically, for people who are graduating, you can start to count work the day that you submit your postgrad work permit application. So when it's filed and you've got confirmation it's submitted, you can then start counting that work history. Now, when it comes to working for the government or institutional employers like the banks, you need to ask questions in advance. And one of the questions I ask is, are you going to be able to support my PR? And the reason I'm telling you this, because I finally have someone I can talk to who's at the early stages, not at the end stages of their postgrad. One individual I talked to yesterday, the employer hired them in a position where there are lots of Canadians to fill the role. So even though they'd like to support them with an LMIA, they know if they post the ads and list the wage and everything, they'll get lots of candidates. And the person is on a postgrad open work permit. So it sounds really exciting and really promising to have an offer from the Ministry of Transport of Ontario. But at the end of the day, the most important question you have to ask any future employer is, do you support permanent residence? And is there a pathway forward? Otherwise, unless you just intend to work for 4 months and then go home, wherever that is, once your work permit's done, you will not have a pathway to permanent residence. So I would strongly encourage you to look into that and to see. But as far as adding the work experience to your profile, the moment if it's authorized, you absolutely can. Like there's no problems with it as long as it's you're not studying full time.
But I do also want to jump in
Mm,
too,
yeah.
Mark, and just say this is not going to qualify for arranged employment points, right? This is not, you can't claim 50 points because you have a job offer for 4 months,
Oh, I see what
right?
you're saying. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Keep in mind that you might be able, if you work for 4 months, then great, you have some Canadian work experience. It has to be high skilled. Make sure that you figure out what the knock is. And maybe, maybe they will extend that and maybe it's in one of the category specific knocks. And so that might give you some eligibility for a category specific draw. But be very careful that that is not going to give you the 50 arranged employment points. If you are working on an open postgrad work permit, you can never get those 50 arranged employment points. The only way, and I've done an explainer video on this, I've got a blog on this, the only way that you can get those 50 arranged employment points is if you're fitting in one of three scenarios. And they all involve closed work permits. So either an LMIA exempt IMP closed work permit, like for example, the Francophone Mobility Work Permit, where you have already been working for a year for the employer named on your work permit, or you have an LMIA with an employer specific work permit, or a new LMIA from an employer. So those are the only situations where you can claim those arranged employment points. And the employer also has to write a letter saying they intend to continue to employ you for at least a year after you get PR. So there's a bunch of factors there.
All right, let's jump to our next question. And this one is from AN, and it follows suit with this. I know any internship done during Canadian studies is not counted towards CEC. However, are the internships done during outside Canada foreign bachelors counted towards FSW?
Yeah. Yeah. So as long as it's high skilled work and you can prove that it was a certain knock and you can get letters from your employer that you have to have been paid, it has to have been paid employment, um, you will add up the time. And the difficult thing is that a lot of the time when I talk to people who are doing internships in the US, it's only a few months, or it's not adding up to a full 6 months, or it's not adding up to enough hours to be able to to cobble together for that knock to form their foreign work experience 1 year continuous work. So yes, you can claim it, but check what the knock is, make sure you can get letters of support from the employer, and accurately put in how many hours you were actually working when you were there.
All right, we'll jump in and we'll cover this one here. Okay, so this one is from Mama. My wife, she's in the U.S. citizen, is U.S. citizen living in the U.S. My case under Bruce. Don't know what that is. I am from Afghanistan. I'm currently in Pakistan. Can I get a Canadian tourist visa to meet my wife there? In my case, it takes time to get an American visa. That's why I want to meet my wife in Canada. So, Alicia, this situation here is basically just someone who is, is a temporary resident, I'm assuming, in Pakistan. Afghanistan obviously is not, a place that people are, super, super excited to return to, I guess, if they've left. Um, uh, let's see here. So ultimately coming and trying to apply to come to Canada so the wife can come visit him here. And the whole issue is speed of processing in his case. So what are your thoughts on that, Alicia?
So IRCC is increasingly trying to process visitor visas through, assisted AI tools, right? They are looking at potential risk factors. And unfortunately, in this case, if you don't have permanent residence in the country where you're currently residing, um, it's tricky. It gets harder for IRCC to approve a visitor visa to Canada if you don't have a connection to your current country of residence and you don't have somebody who's willing to support you while you're in Canada. Normally, they look at invitation letters and things like that. They also really want to see what your temporary intent is and your ties back to your home country. And if your country of citizenship, if you don't have a lot of ties there, it becomes harder for them to approve that visa because it's harder for you to prove that you have a temporary intent. So there are some definite hurdles to overcome there. Um, so you can consider submitting an application to try to meet in the middle, to try to meet in Canada, but you're going to have to be very specific about what proof do you have of your temporary intent? How are you supporting yourself financially? Where are you going to go? How long are you going to stay? What proof do you have that you're going to go back?
All right, I'm going to pull this one up here from Jane. She's posted a couple times, and the reason, Jane, when you say I, this is why I always direct. And also, just before we jump back to Jane, I just want to pull this one up from the person who just answered the question. Oh, this is where I'm learning patience. So we absolutely do not answer the questions in order. We don't, and we may not even answer your question. But remember, we do our best to try to select questions that are of the most benefit to everyone who is posting. And so if your question is very specific like yours was, then we may not choose to answer that because we're trying to make the best and most use out of this 1 hour that we have. So thank you all for your patience. Okay, so back to Jane. So working as an EIT in Ontario. What is an EIT, Alicia?
Engineering training.
Engineering training. Okay. A 14-14 rotation for a year. That's insane. How do I count my skill work experience hours as they ask weekly hours on the Express Entry profile? I'm bilingual and on a PSW, PSWG. Boy, these acronyms are killing me today. Um, so this is a situation basically, Jane, where with the rotations and with the work, 14 on and 14 off. So is with that, how many hours are you working a week? I guess is the question. So when you're trying to calculate that, then maybe you have to take more averages. Anytime you're in a situation like this, you can generally kind of average it out how many on average hours you worked a week, and you roll with that. How many hours a day when you had 14 hours on and 14 off, that's 14 days on, 14 days off, I'm assuming is the rotation. What you're trying to do is you're trying to create a picture for immigration that explains as close as you can to what they're looking for, which is full-time work, which is 30 hours per week or more, or part-time work, which is at least 15. So sometimes in these situations, when you try to, you know, try to consolidate it, you may come up with less than 30 hours per week ultimately that you work. And if that's the case, then in some cases they count that as well. Often the law suggests that that is considered to be part-time work. So you need to work more than a year in order to accumulate the full 1,560 hours. So other examples of this are people who work on overseas cruise ships and things like that, or teachers, right, that have the summers off. So every situation is a little bit different, and we definitely need to get a little bit more information, Jane. And I recommend, once again, that you book a consultation with us, and then we can dig deeper and see exactly what's going on. But Alicia, what are your thoughts for Jane?
Yeah, and so Jane, often I recommend to my clients that they keep a spreadsheet, right? That they actually tally up all their hours and they can track it with pay stubs and they can show, look, this is ongoing work, it's high skilled work, it's work that I'm getting paid at a good wage for, it is engineering training, I'm meeting the knock, I'm meeting the main duties and the lead statement of this job. And the way that the company has structured it is to do it this way because of the work obligation for clients in the field. And as long as you are honest and you've backed everything up and you can show it, then immigration can't say misrep. They might deduct the number of hours, just like Mark said. You can get capped, right? So you can't carry over. If you worked 50 hours one week, you can't say, oh, well, I worked an extra 20 hours. I can count 30 and then use the other 20. They say, no way. If you work more than 30 in any given week, you're capped at 30 for that week in terms of what you can claim. Um, but if you're working these rotational shifts constantly, like Mark said, you can say, well, here's what I did as an averaging of how many hours per month that I worked. Explain that in the letter, have the employer explain that in the letter, back it up with your spreadsheets and your pay stubs. But in terms of how long you need to have worked in order to properly safely claim your year of Canadian work experience, we would definitely need to take a look at things with you.
All right, let's hit a few more here. We're kind of into overtime a little bit. Um, yeah, some of you have asked some really specific questions about your unique situations, and we're just not able to address those. So I apologize. The more general you can make the question, then that's possible. Anthony asks a really interesting question here. The ONP has slots for their draws. If your CRS score is between this and this, then you could potentially get one of our notifications of interest to apply. Now, he says, can I choose not to claim points for Canadian education to be eligible for the ONP? Well, you can. Their system that extends out those notifications of interest only looks at your CRS score. So if you've chosen not to list your Canadian education, well, it's gonna lower your CRS score by 15 or 30 points correspondingly. And if that puts you in the range where you could get an ONP, then that might work. It's always difficult, right? Because who knows, maybe there's a general draw that you would have gotten drawn if you had left those points in. So making those decisions is really, really risky. And Anthony says, hey, Mark, your Express Entry Accelerated course is very useful. Can I choose not to claim points for McKinney Education? Yeah. So that's kind of the question. And Anthony, and those of you who have subscribed, tonight at 4 p.m. is when I do the masterclass for the Express Entry Accelerator. And I had to postpone it a couple times because of other commitments. But you can see here, when you subscribe, you go to our courses here, the Express Entry Accelerator and Masterclass, not to mention all of the on-demand content that you have that's available. You can see here that we do masterclass sessions bi-weekly on Wednesdays from 4 to 6. We may not go the whole 2 hours tonight, because I have another commitment, but 4 o'clock it's your opportunity to come and get all of your questions answered. So if you haven't subscribed to that and you're in the process of even considering Express Entry, this is a fantastic place to start. And I've shared lots of information about this in the past, but I appreciate when past subscribers connect in and share their experience using it. So that's fantastic. Okay. All right. Okay, Norton is saying, answer my question about profile. All right, Norton, give me a second here. we'll answer and we'll finish this last one. Okay. So Norton says, in the express entry profile creation, should I mention no to spouse work in and education if I don't want points? Yes. Also, for myself, should I only mention work that is enough points or all 12 years? Should counsel, well, what I'll recommend, go over here and subscribe to the course, and you'll learn everything that you need to learn about this whole process, including the questions that you're asking here. But you only need to mention in the work history section and the study history uh, information that you want to claim points for. You don't need to include all of your work history, regardless of whether or not you're claiming points. Or remember, for foreign work experience, aside from the federal skilled worker eligibility, where you can claim up to 6 points towards hitting that 67-point pass mark for the federal skilled worker program eligibility, leaving that aside, for the comprehensive ranking system, once you hit 3 years of foreign work experience, you're not getting any more CRS points. So adding in, a whole bunch more work history isn't necessarily going to add, any value for you. So I will often choose not to list work history in there that I'm not claiming points for. However, there's one major caveat, and that is in your personal history. When it asks you to list everything you've done over the past 10 years, you will 100% list everything. All work that you performed, part-time, work that was done as an internship, work or education that was done together concurrently. I'll list both of those things. Memberships in organizations, military service, all of those things are listed in full and nothing is left out. So that is how I address that question. All right. Okay. Well, I think, Alicia, we are at the end of the line here. We had a really good a good run. Oh boy, I can't. You guys keep sucking me in. Okay, one last express entry question, and how would officers verify foreign work experience for countries that don't use banking systems or pay stubs? Is providing work reference letter enough? So I just helped a client file an application yesterday, and the country that the person came from, he worked for a really good employer there, but he was paid cash and there were no pay slips or pay stubs. And so all that we had was the reference letter. Now, if you look at the specific instructions from IRCC, it clearly states that a reference letter with all of those essential components is mandatory. And it says include pay slips if available, which opens up the reality that a reference letter alone is the minimum that you need to include to prove work history. However, if there is the possibility of obtaining pay slips or pay stubs, providing any tax filing documents, anything else to verify that you're actually getting paid, even sometimes I'll include bank statements showing an automatic payroll deposit into an account to show that the compensation is coming, I will always include that. One of the things I said to the individual, I said, look, you're going to be okay. I can go onto your reference letter. I can type into Google the address of the employer. I can see the employer. They've got a sophisticated website. I think it was marketing, digital marketing company. I can't remember what it was, but there was a very sophisticated presence. They were in different countries. And so it was easy to verify that the company existed. Now, if someone works for a little mom and pop shop in maybe Chandigarh and they don't have a website and they're paid cash and there is no real mechanism for independently verifying that work history, then an officer could ask questions and may look for something more, because the burden always is on you to establish that you've done that work history. But ultimately, the reference letter, at a very bare minimum, is what you need to do to provide a complete application. All right.
And I'll add to that really quickly
Yeah,
too. I
please.
had a consult with somebody who was trying to claim foreign work experience points, and the officer just didn't believe that there was enough in that short little letter to substantiate that it was actually a high skilled occupation that they claimed that they were doing. And they were very upset that they didn't have a chance to provide more information. They said they just refused. And this is what can happen. The officer won't ask for additional information if they look at that letter and they just think it's not sufficient and it's not a company that's easily verifiable, and they might just not take any extra time to try to figure out what's going on, and they might just refuse, saying you're not meeting the eligibility criteria by proving that you have the job experience you claimed in the knock.
Exactly. All right, everyone. This wraps up this week's live Q&A. I want to thank Alicia, as always, for being the purveyor of knowledge and insight as we go through these questions. It's really I'm really grateful for her, because it makes it a lot easier. A couple of weeks ago, when they were attending the National Immigration Conference in Montreal, I was back doing my live stream again. Now, it can be a little bit more rough and tumble when I'm here, because I'm always careful that I'm not saying goofy things when Alicia's with me. But the reality is, it makes things a whole lot easier and more organized when I know she can answer the question while I'm looking through the whole bunch of questions that are coming. And so we appreciate all of you guys. This is a lot of fun for us. It's the foundation of our practice. You know, we hope that through the information we're sharing with you, that you'll gain trust and confidence that when you need to hire someone to help you, or you just want that peace of mind, that you'll choose us. And like Alicia said, Igor has revamped our website here, and so we'd encourage you to slide over and take a look at Holthe Immigration Law, see what we offer. There's a ton of resources. We've got information on our team, how to contact us, booking a consultation. We've got blogs and our podcast. The podcast is something that I want to point out, because we've just released a bunch of new episodes, and they've been coming fast and furious. And I just released one this morning, which I think you absolutely want to listen to. All of you that are tuning in right now, and this is the one on the dangers of crowdsourcing Canadian immigration information. And I had my special guest, Robert Leong, who's a lawyer in Vancouver. And then immediately before that one, Alicia and I just did one on the PNP battle for PR in Canada, from temporary to tenuous. And you can if you commute a lot, if you're traveling around, you can listen pretty much anywhere podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify. And this is a great way to get educated on the latest and greatest stuff. And what we're doing now with each of these, when we release them, generally speaking now, we also will have them up here on our YouTube channel, so you can check them out as well. So you can see, here's the video of Robert and I, and then Alicia and my PNP battle, and yeah, everything. There's just a ton of things. No ITA. Here's some things that you need to do. So we've got a bunch of different videos, and make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure that you check out our the podcast, and just stay connected. Sometimes we don't always give a lot of lead time when we go live, and the moment the government announces something, sometimes I'll even live stream it as a watch party when the minister's doing an announcement that I hear about. So stay tuned. Thanks so much, Alicia, for connecting in. And I am going to just leave with just a little tiny teaser. And that teaser is that, in conjunction with our Express Entry Accelerator, and as a way to kind of give back, I've decided to make some changes with the content that we're producing on the YouTube channel. And Igor and I are in the process of creating an intro guide to Express Entry that is going to be 100% free, that offers some phenomenal information and guidance at zero cost to you. And in a way, it's a little bit of a teaser, because the Express Entry Accelerator is freaking awesome. But this is a little intro to say, hey, maybe what Mark has isn't just the fluff like everybody else that's out there. And look at what he's given away for free. And this is so helpful. I want more. So that's the goal. So stay tuned. We're going to be releasing those in our playlists on the YouTube channel, in a series of videos that all help to get you up to speed with what's happening with Express Entry. And then when the time comes to dive in deep, where you're really completing your own applications and you're looking for insight, then you've got options, which of course, the Express Entry Accelerator course, but even Alicia and I within the firm here, one of the things that we love to do as much as anything else is helping people with their Express Entry applications. So make sure that you come check it out, see and learn all the information that we have on our website. And ultimately, it all starts with this, booking a consult. So do that. All right. Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And